Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today to the second panel of the 2020 Prelude Festival. My name is Lucy Powis. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling in from Toronto, which is the land of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. I'm one of the producers for the 2020 Prelude Festival, Sites of Revolution, which is hosted by the Martin E. Segal Theatre Center. This year's festival, given the givens of 2020, is all happening online. We started premiering live events on October 20th, and we'll be premiering them through this Friday, October 30th. We're producing a variety of panels and performances on many different digital platforms, and everything is free of charge. Many of them are also staying up beyond the end of the festival this Friday. So we really recommend checking out our website at preludenyc2020.com. Now, though, without further ado, I would love to welcome you all to Striking the Balance, a conversation with Middle Eastern, North African, and South Asian theater artists working in non-traditional styles. And we'll invite our guests in now.
Hi. How's it going? We made it. I'm Avi Amon. I am a composer and sound designer living here in Brooklyn, and my family is from Istanbul, Turkey.
I'm Mariam Bazeed. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a writer. I write prose, poetry, and plays, and I'm a stage actor and performer as well. I have a spiritual home in Cairo, Egypt, and my home is in Brooklyn. That's it, I think.
Hey everyone, Kareem Fahmy here, he, him pronouns. I'm a director and a playwright. I'm also one of the co-founders of My Directors, which is a consulting group for artists and organizations working with MENASA stories. I'm based in New York. I am Canadian, and my parents are from the Middle East, from Egypt.
Hey, I'm Moe Yousuf. I'm a South Asian American human being caught at the occupation of a theater, of an arts worker and associate artistic director at Target Margin Theater. He, him, his pronouns. And I have the pleasure of knowing all of you in different ways, which is really, I don't know how the Brady Bunch thing is working out for you, but.
It's very good on my end. Very good.
Some pretty good records. So
Yeah.
we brought this panel together. This isn't so much a panel as a conversation. So there's no moderators and no guests. We're all sort of moderators and guests at the same time. But the idea was to bring a MENASA perspective to Prelude this year by really discussing so many of the things that we talk about within our community, which is, you know, how our stories are told, what our stories are, what forms they take. And you know, I have the privilege of knowing and calling friends all of these extraordinary artists here, and I thought it would be really great for us to talk about how we make work in these sort of non-traditional spaces and styles, and just sort of what the challenges of that are, what it means, and sort of maybe what the might hold for that type of storytelling.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, it's probably like a conversation that many of us have on a regular basis as we sort of are figuring out what, I don't know, who we are, how we are continually changing in the work we're making, and who our community
For better or
is.
for worse. For better or for worse. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And we were talking about the term MENASA. You know, it's great. You know, it's funny because we spoke earlier. We were like, "Oh, we just did the thing." We were like, "We just did the thing."
We had a pre-talk, and we pre-talked it out.
We were like, "What are we gonna do? What are we gonna say?" But MENASA, that term, at least for me, and I'll speak to it, but then I'm really curious about how everyone feels about it. You know, when I first heard it, actually MENA first and then MENASA, I was really questioning or thinking, how do I identify Mo? I was saying human first, then a Pakistani American, and then South Asian American, and I'm a person of mixed racial background as well. So it suddenly became important for me to really explore these terms that were being circulated, and whether or not I felt like I was inclusive of them or not, in terms of my, I don't know, personally how I identified, but then also artistic aesthetic was something that we were discussing. Do these terms hold or contain a perspective about our, aesthetics, which is itself its own thing. So this is our icebreaker. So I sort of take that and put that in place.
Was that for you, or was that like in relation to other people? Like, was that a personal identity exploration, or was that other people wishing you would explore your identity for them?
Man, Avi, this is some real talk right here. So another thing I'm curious to hear everyone else say, I was told specifically in my career at certain times by mostly white mentors that I should write about my cultural identity explicitly, and that it would be of interest to the culture. And so there was definitely an overarching influence there, or suggestion, I should say, to do that. And I don't know if you can ever get, regardless of who suggested or how it came, I think we all are making work about identity. I think it's impossible to make work that has nothing to do with identity. So that's there. So I think it was both. It was like a personal thing, but then also it was, as I was seeing more work, which is really exciting, by a community of artists who are more diverse, and whether it's you associate as MENASA as just who you are with X cultural identity. I was seeing work in that community that I thought, well, I don't know if aesthetically I really fit into that category, but I want to see more of it, because it seems, and Kareem, you were saying this, we were talking about it, like we are young in our community.
Well, even that we are a community, right? And that's why the whole MENASA thing is interesting, because it.
Oh no,
it's a little bit, I don't want to say it's complete. Go ahead, Mariam.
Oh wait, we had a
Oh, sorry, I think you were frozen.
Was I? Oh.
You lagged, yeah.
Oh, did I? Well,
yeah. It was an amazing answer, though, I bet.
I can never replicate it ever again. I was saying that the term is so, oh yeah, my connection is unstable. I mean, there's nothing I can do about it. I'm unstable, y'all.
Don't blame it on your connection, Kareem.
Connection.
Yeah,
why is it even grouped together is it's like a really interesting question, right? Because it's culturally, I might be very, very far away from someone in Kerala, India, right? But yet, I mean, like when we were planning out how to work together as Maya directors, which I mentioned earlier, as a consulting group, at first we were only focused on MENA because the four of us who comprise it are all specifically of Middle Eastern descent. But then we realized that a lot of what we do is casting consultation, and so many South Asian people are cast as Arab or Middle Eastern people, and sometimes kind of conversely. And then we thought, well, so then we sort of encompass all of that. So it's a very tricky, nebulous term.
I feel like what's common though, and what we're all saying, is that a little bit it is in response to like a commercial directive almost, right? Like it's like your mentors are the same people who are like populating the festivals, right? And so it's like, if they think that it's important for you to say that you're an identity-based artist, then they are looking for identity art from an identity-based artist. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when they cast, like then they're working with Kareem as a consultant, and like he then has to choose whether to respond to kind of like the blurring of like South Asia and Arab, whatever, like you all kind of look the same, come over here, right? And we don't get a choice into the marketplace that we're walking into. It's just kind of like, do you participate? Do you not participate?
Yeah, and I think that the term certainly does allow us to sort of gather as a community. And yes, exactly what you said, Mariam, it sort of is in response to, and we're going to
Oh no.
This is
Oh
live.
no, Kareem.
This is live TV.
What I think he was going to say was that we're going to be talking about that a lot throughout the rest of this panel, specifically with regards to each of our work and how it relates to that very question.
Does it feel like a good moment maybe to ask Mo to show some of his work while Kareem figures out whatever's going on?
That seems like the right idea.
That's great.
Yeah, Sammy, would you mind playing the clip, please?
आप दिखाई देती है इतने स्पष्ट रूप में जैसे कि एक सच है मेरी सच्ची तो वार की तरह आप मुझे सही दिशा में ले जा रहे हैं और मेरा ये इरादा था आपको इस्तेमाल करने का तुम अभी भी दिखाई दे रही हो तुम अभी भी दिखाई दे रही हो तुम अभी भी दिखाई दे रही हो अब आप कान पे खून के निशान इसका पहले दाग नहीं था खून के निशान इसका पहले दाग नहीं दे रहा था ऐसा कुछ नहीं 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 बस
Mo, I love that. Before, I have like a big question, but what, could you introduce like what that piece is from first?
No.
No, I will not.
I'm not going to explain my work to you, Avi. No, wow. Honestly, it took me a minute to figure out what was going on.
Like, what's the piece from? Yeah.
That was recorded on March 12th. That's why
of this year.
Of this year.
Whoa.
Yeah. It's in a whole of its
I shudder to think of the time. That's what happened for me when you said that.
Well,
so that's an in rehearsal recording of just trying to build just a collection of memories of what it is we were doing at the time. That's a piece called we were working on a piece called Present Shame and Further Woe. And in it, you saw Sean Devare on violin, Sean Jane, who is standing, reading the speech, Gayatri Ball, who is an amazing performer, who's pregnant actually during that. And then Brian Lawler, who we got to see get hot and take off a sweatshirt in the back. Where Brian Lawler is a composer who I've worked with. So very much in process. Piece also not present, but working on the piece at the same time was Karishma Bagani, who through Maya directors who I worked with through Target Margin and way to go. Like, I don't know if this is the moment to just plug them, but it's really like it was amazing. I was looking for I was looking for someone of South Asian descent who could translate in Hindi and Urdu if necessary. Um, and and in our field, I mean, like how many people can you, like stage managers or assistant directors can you find? It was very challenging. And so, which just speaks to the sort of like kind of need of more more representation and more opportunities and the change in the culture. But it was, I won't go into too much detail and I'll stop talking in a second, but it's the piece that that I started making that I'll sort of go down the rabbit hole, but I was reading about the history of Pakistan and India, particularly interested in how this came to be, especially the country of Pakistan, which is where my father is from, Karachi. And through there was a historical figure, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who's the first president of Pakistan, among many other things, who also was an aspiring Shakespearean actor and has his own an iconoclast and very interesting story. And through opening these little doors, I just got to this kind of place and looking at other forms of South Asian classical performance, music, dance, dance theater, which is its own massive, almost like more experimental than anything I've ever witnessed. Like, when you look at it, I'm just like, oh, okay, you're gonna do this performance for 40 days. I'm like, what? Yeah, I want that. And there's gonna be a dance that no one sees. I'm like, what? And then these highly skilled actors, you're gonna watch them get into costume for hours before anything happens, and then they're gonna, it's just really amazing. So that was this sort of, those were all the doors, and this is just a moment of capturing some of that.
Do you think that it is, I guess, do you consider it MENASA art?
Damn, that's a great question. That's a really great question. I don't know the answer to it. What I can say, if we were talking about this in another conversation, but just about like, I feel very much that most of my life as a consumer of art and a maker of art, what I have consumed has been mostly from Western or white perspectives, or certainly it's disproportionately I've seen work made by white men. I think that's probably true of every human being.
What are you talking about?
And I've also
Right.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
He's got a lot to say. He needs to wet the whistle.
And so when I've been thinking about my own work, but also what influences my work as well, which is what I think is good or not, is really from that place. And so I think experimental theater is obviously dominated by a lot of this work, the history of it itself. So I do ask that, am I recreating a kind of aesthetic, or am I rehashing things that are inherited in this way? How can I create obstacles to do that, or recreate a process, or not rely on any of this training? And I guess the thing I have to my benefit is that I was I went to school for writing, so I did receive like a formal training in writing. I have no experience directing. So I'm like, this is great. And if you can have a team of people who really trust you and trust the work and the relationships, it's really all about that, then you can actually maybe make something from a more quote unquote authentic or different place.
Do you feel like it's different because, so you say you have experience in writing, right? And then you're creating a piece which is not wholly based on just text, right? So obviously it's pulling in all of these different elements, music and dance theater. And you said something that really gave me pause, because it made me think that even sort of the great experimentalists that we all uphold, even those people are often white men, or certainly not people that look like us. And it makes me think of like the first time I tried, I grew up in Quebec. And so one of the first like experimental theater things I saw was Robert Lepage, who is, a Quebec artist.
Mm-hmm.
And it was mind blowing. It was like truly like a life-changing moment for me as a young budding theater artist. I certainly never thought about the idea that I could even possibly be like him, because do people like us get to be people like him? So it's interesting to kind of reflect back to the question. It's like, it's still, is it MENASA art because we're MENASA people? But then is that a different category that is not whatever you want to call it, experimental theater, performance art? Is it its own category of Middle Eastern MENASA performance art? Like the categories keep on like getting chunked together. Pakistani American dance theater, and like you have your own festival that's just for Pakistani American.
Super niche.
It's a super niche festival, but really cool. I want to go to that festival. So it's.
Well, it's interesting too what you say, Kareem, because like your question about like I could never be that is prescient a little bit, because like what you're predicting is that MENASA art will always be considered as like this thing that's caught in amber, right? We're all talking about like culture as it is. And so like the idea that we could develop our own experimental forms, like as soon as you walk into that territory, the assumption is you're borrowing from Western art rather than following the arc of something that exists alongside on a completely different track and isn't defined by this other thing.
Yes, Mariam, I think that's a really interesting point. Also, like, it seems to me that a lot of people's experience of experimental is just regular in a lot of other places. So like, to your point, like, can there ever be, like, is there a new Pakistani aesthetic that is indeed experimental in the context of itself? Or is it just that it's Pakistani that it is experimental?
Yeah.
Wow, God.
And how do you work on, like, how do you fix that when the problem is a limitation in the lexica of the audience and the lexica of the curators and the lexica of the developers? It's like, where do you get to fixing the problem?
Yeah, and how do you even begin to define where the problem starts? Because it's all a real structural thing, right? And it's going to come back to the idea that like the default is white art, right? Like when that's the default, we're always going to be niche, right? So I think it's changing. I mean, I don't want this to be a very gloom and doom conversation. Like I think that the whole the whole fact that we can gather and talk about this be some hope, but I still always feel like there is this box that we get put in, and it is like, okay, now here are MENASA people over here creating MENASA work. And so what we're doing, at least, with certain projects that we work on, because I know we all work on lots of different things, right? But we're fit into the category of artists of color, BIPOC artists creating work in and about their community. And within that, there's a range of like, let's say, traditional, uber naturalistic something, and then all sorts of things in between to whatever you want to call it, something that might even not be quite theater. But do we fit into a larger canon of experimental avant-garde performance art that has nothing to do with our identity as makers, right? So I'm really curious about that.
Yeah.
Should we share some more work and like talk about?
Oh yeah.
Because I feel like it's through the conversation of our work. Mariam, I know that you have something to share with us.
Yeah, I will share screen right now. So this is possibly the only poem I will ever write about the United States Census, but that's what the poem's about. And I'm just gonna read it. In America, where all lives matter and Egyptian Arabs are white. Soundless fire on the TV, spelling hunger. All the years the locusts ate. All the years spent rejecting the very notion of sky. Most of America is dead and all lives matter. I buy pants on clearance, at least a dozen laboring hands touch the whole thing, metal container ships and all, costs me 60 cents. Because, you know, though things might be bad here in some ways, it's still true that in this America, you can find a deal. Prezi Wezi says you're only sick because you're testing. So if you're not testing, you're not sick, making America great again. The logic of which is transferable might even go some ways to explain why the administration saw fit, despite the big old scientific study conducted by the Bureau itself in 2015 to show conclusively, mathematically even, that there'd be fewer white people in America if you stop counting people considered not white for literally every single other intent and purpose in America as white. In this year of the plague 2020, not to be counting any Arabs. Because you see, if you're not testing for Arabs, you can't ever know how sick you are with them in these United States. So it makes sense, really, that the census this year in America, where have we mentioned all lives matter? Where, as we know, bootstraps can oftentimes resemble being counted, can oftentimes resemble empty boxes on federal forms you have the right to. Where have we mentioned? There was once even a Black president who, worry not for your safety, USA, USA, was white acting enough to still drop bombs on a whole lot of potentially dangerous people. America is magic, isn't it? You put an Obama in on one end, out the other comes a Karen. In that America, the census this year tells you that even if you write in Egyptian, Arab, Arab, Middle Eastern, Towelhead Jihadi, ISO virgins, guaranteed randomized search at the airport American. Fingerprints in a database, yes, all 10 digits, please, ma'am, sir, American. Don't wear your language on a t-shirt and expect to take off with the plane and corpsed in your script, American. Even if you write all that in, the census this year tells you that in this America, none of it matters because you, lucky ducky, you get the upgrade. Slough off the 20th and the 21st centuries. Burn Edward Said's out-of-date scholarship. Forget the wars that brought you and your chameleon skin this far west to what used to be the where the sun of your country set up shiru. You are become white, ya Layla. You are become white, ya Muhammad. America is great again. All lives matter. And there is no need for testing, no need for a count. In a land so egalitarian, even the census is colorblind.
Yes.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Wow.
That was stunning.
Point. Drop that on us.
That was stunning.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that.
Oh my God, yeah. Wow, Mariam.
It's all real, by the way. This is like the Trump administration after the previous administration decided that, yes, we are a category large enough that it would matter in terms of federal funding, whether we are counted in the census or not. They literally decided not to debut the category.
And it was interesting that it actually, because, you know, as I said, my parents from Egypt, and one of the you know, there are certain examples that were listed under the white category, and it says like, if you are Egyptian, and it really does, it throws you for a loop, right? Because I have actually always used the term Arab. I'm not one of these people that dislikes the term Arab. And arguably, I mean, events related to Arabs and Arab Americans and people like me who are Muslim have shaped the American experience so much for the last 20 years, but yet we are absorbed into whiteness on something as important as the US Census. It actually makes kind of your brain hurt to not understand it, you know, for me.
Well, it's been a I mean, in Bay Ridge, New York, right, in Brooklyn, one of the largest populations of Arabic speaking people in the country, probably like Dearborn, Michigan, in Bay Ridge. This was a huge, and not the 20, maybe it was the 2010, it must have been 2010, but right after 9/11, you know, for two issues. One is that no one trusted the government. No one wanted to put any info, and I mean, I don't know how anyone else feels, but I'm not offering up any extra information to anyone about that I don't need to. And then also this huge issue about what happens in terms of federal funding when you make everyone in there white. Like, it's really, when we talk about, you know, white supremacy, like, it's truly.
Yeah. And like, it's shocking that in a place like Dearborn, Michigan, where like, if you walk around in the streets and somebody is speaking, it is probably like statistically Arabic. Like, that was my experience being there, right? And so the fact that like public schools there don't get funding for a language program because they're literally counting that whole area as like a bunch of white people living there.
Yeah, they're like, you're us.
But yet in theater, we're not. Like, could you imagine if I, you know, it's like, it's almost the opposite, right? Like, if I'm to click on a box in a grant application, like, I'm not going to click the white box because I'm probably not going to get the grant, you know? So, but it's all a matter of perspective, right? You know, and that's why I think it is so hard, specifically with our community, because there is such a broad range, right? First, in terms of like we were talking about before, like the actual communities and countries and histories that are included in it, everything in terms of the physical markers of it, you know?
Like, also, like, look at the map, like the map of the regions just in the title, Middle East, North Africa, South Asian, is like,
right.
So it's bigger than any empire that ever existed. Like, that is huge, a huge swath of territory, and like mountain ranges dividing them, and like it's amazing, actually.
And also different faiths and different, you know, belief systems that are wildly different from one another, you know. So I do always find it a little, you know, there's this interesting thing when it comes to, you know, how we cast specifically, because sometimes if I'm casting a Middle Eastern role, forgive me, a role that is meant for an Arab, and I'm working with somebody with a South Asian background and something having to do with Islam is embedded in it, you could have somebody who is an Islamic South Asian, or you could also have somebody who is Buddhist or someone who is Hindu, like very, very different histories and belief systems, right? But yet we're all sort of together, which I think is beautiful, but also really complicated. Really complicated.
Yeah. And also specificity, just one final note about that. It's like, you know, when you watch a movie and it's taking place in Iran and they're speaking Arabic and you're like, I don't think that's the language there, or like that would be spoken as ubiquitously, but it's like, it's fine though. It reads as Arabic.
But then you know there's this like, and maybe this is a segue. I'm not trying to jump anything, but you know, in terms of non-traditional casting, you know, and so there's I think now there's a big focus. I'll just talk to some larger institutions on this exact thing. Okay, this is let's say, for example, this is a character of South Asian descent. Let's say they're from India, but they're from South India. They're from Northern India. There's an extra detail for quote unquote authenticity, right? Trying, at least some of them, trying to be authentic. But then in the world of, you know, in experimental or non-traditional forms, we might be challenging some of these things. Like, what does it mean to be authentic? What is it, you know, and be a little bit more free. So what is the tension and boundaries in there, or responsibilities we may feel to our community, to the word MENASA, to the work we're making?
Yeah.
I think when you're working on a more traditional form, right? Sorry, traditional is kind of the wrong word, but let's say naturalistic form, you do get kind of locked into, you know, if I'm going to write a play, like for instance, I have a play right now that is very much set in the real world and very naturalistic, and there are two characters of Iranian descent in the play, and it has been very important to me that for every iteration of that project, those actors be Iranian, but that's what the form sort of demands, because the play sort of functions by a certain set of rules. And then when you start to veer off into plays that don't have as many rules and forms and styles and non-traditional experimental, you can sort of break that down. And so, you know, I think in any other context, artists like us, if we were to come in with an entire cast or group of collaborators, none of whom share our same identity markers, whatever they are, we might get sort of glared at. But in an experimental world, I think that's actually more encouraged. And isn't that even a more freeing way to think about how we create our work?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main difference is that one of them is like intentional about it, and the other one is just kind of being like, you know, nobody's gonna pay attention. You know, like it's again assuming a majority white audience that does not care, that just like wants the experience of hearing like foreign words to feel like they're in some type of like naturalistic environment or whatever. And so like breaking that rule and being more intentional about it is a different thing.
Well, they're going to be like, wait, but you can't, but you said you can't have a white person play that role, but then you did. Kareem, you have some explaining to do.
Can we see some of your work, Kareem?
Oh, sure. Is it that time? Let's do it. Let's play a clip, please.
Why won't you tell me what they did to you? Why would you want to know that? You barely looked me in the eye since you got back. Just tell me. Then you tell me. Or you. I'm here too. I'm here too! Stop. It's okay. They brought you here before and you didn't tell me. Why didn't you tell me? Why don't you trust me?
Let's do something else.
No, not today.
Please go off. I'll do it.
Alright, fine.
Great. Okay. You'll be with me and. Ready to go.
Well, if you say so, though it was just starting to get interesting.
The master gave you no permission to leave.
I didn't ask for it.
And that's 3.
I remember
say,
watching that show. So great.
Yeah.
little Batman animated series. You know, that's so that's a clip from a show that I created thanks in large part to the wonderful Moe right here at Target Margin a couple of years ago now, God, or 3 years ago. You know, and it really is to me at the heart of, and we're talking just about casting and about, you know, the word I like to use a lot is freedom, right? So like you notice from that clip, so that was the entire cast of The Triumphant, and we made that show together. I mean, we literally made that show in 4 weeks. I started with 0 words on a page and 5 actors and a composer and a wonderful team of designers, and we made that show. And ostensibly the entire piece was set in a prison in the Middle East. It was very much inspired by real interviews with gay men in Egypt and across the Middle East that I conducted, along with a lot of reporting on human rights violations of what was happening to the LGBTQ community there. But yet the piece was created by a Latino man, a white man, a Black man, a trans Middle Eastern man, and a half Japanese woman, along with designers of all various backgrounds. And we could all meet with the commonality of the story, right? Across our cultural divides, across our religious divides, across our background. And it was one of the more freeing, probably one of the most freeing theater experiences I had as a creator, because I was 100%, I just want to name this, and I say this with all the respect and love in the world to Target Margin, but certainly there was a feeling that I was approached on this project because I was a person of Middle Eastern descent, because it was in conversation with 1001 Nights, right? But having the freedom to create a work where it wasn't about telling a traditional narrative where everybody had to represent a certain identity. You know, those characters didn't have names. They were called M1, 2, 3, 4, and W, right? And so I think that the more that the people who kind of hold those keys, right, empower artists like us to say, like, you don't need to have a script. You know, you don't need to come in with anything other than your full creative self, right? And did anybody tell me that I had to do anything having to do with the Middle East? Absolutely not. I chose to find this bridge to a true Middle Eastern story, which had to do with these interviews with gay men, but there was also Batman in it, you know? And so I think that the more that people like us are empowered to just be authorial voices that are not bound by the idea of, like, there's a right way of telling a Middle Eastern or a MENASA story, then I think a lot can open up for us in the future.
Well, Kareem, first of all, prove to me that Batman is not from the Middle East. Like,
well,
just prove it.
I can't prove that to you. There's a character that's about to show up that is like the Middle Eastern villain from Batman, which is why I included those clips, you know. But it was like, because it was about cultural appropriation, right? But boy, you know, like, when else do I get to do that again? When do I get to have fun like that again? And it's tricky to find those opportunities. I'm not going to lie. You know, it's the industry isn't necessarily set up for us, both the sort of traditional part of the industry, as it were, and the more experimental one, because I do think they look at our community and they're like, we haven't seen you people on the international touring circuit, you know. And I've been told that before, and that's sort of something that I think we can work to correct. But does it keep us marginalized and like telling a certain type of story, is a question that I have for all of you guys.
I mean, it's a really interesting point, because when I remember seeing your piece and I saw it I had the, you know, pleasure of seeing it multiple times.
Stuck there, Mo. Just admit it. You were stuck.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, everything Kareem said is true. Like, there was no script, there was nothing, right? But you know what was there was Kareem. Like, there was a human being, actually, who, that's what we were interested in. That's what we were invested in. And I think that's, for me, a big thing for these institutions, which is, let's get beyond the opportunity, beyond the Arab Festival, beyond the MENASA Festival. Let's just start looking at these talented people and start giving them opportunities, not because they fit into a curatorial season now that, you know, funders are more, you know, scrutinizing, you know, the percentage of playwrights who are of color, and your staff of color and your board of color, like, and the work was funny. It was beautiful. I mean, it was, I wasn't in the room when you made it. When I saw it, I would say, oh, this is a play, right? But the way that piece was made was not the way that Kareem, I believe, has ever had up until that point assembled this piece. So we still need to be pushing. We still need to be flexing those and experimenting as well. And oftentimes the opportunities, we're not given those opportunities. We're doing it ourselves, which is great. But at a certain point, the self-producing model, which I think all of us have done, is you hit a ceiling there, and you need to kind of cross.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah, never gonna do it again.
And I think the thing that ends up happening, and one of the things that adds to, because the word exhaustion is exactly right. I mean, self-producing exhaustion. And then I think working in those sort of traditional forms can be exhausting as well. I mean, despite the fact that we made that piece in a month, every single day was exhilarating. And I think I realized the difference is that in almost every situation where I'm in professionally, where I'm working on anything having to do with my community, a big part of my job is teaching my collaborators and teaching my audiences and teaching my funders and teaching my producers something about my identity or my culture. And it's something I always say, like, we kind of have to do it, right? Because almost always we're one of the very first people of our background in those institutions and in those projects. And that's, you know, the difference with something like, you know, the projects that three of us on this call did at Target Margin, was that was never part of the equation. We didn't have to teach anybody anything. Avi didn't have to say, I am a Turkish man and I'm writing something about, like, you know, that wasn't even part of it. And look at the creative freedom that comes from that, you know? So I think when we dismantle this idea that, like, us as MENASA artists, our job is to educate and create didactic work, which tells, frankly, white audiences about our community, you take that off, you take that barrier off, and the creativity will explode. But we're just stuck there. It's too often.
I mean, if
it's
you
frustrating.
Sorry, go ahead.
There you go, Mariam.
I've spoken a lot. I want to hear what you have to say.
I was just gonna say, like, Wikipedia exists. Like, y'all could just Google some shit. Like, let Kareem and Mariam and Mo just do their thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you try to imagine, like, the list of instructions that you would have to give an American-born, like, whatever, English speaking from the very beginning, like, not an ethnic minority or a racial minority or whatever, if you, like, had to give them the list of things that they would have to address in every scene just to make sure that the audience is with them the whole time about American culture, you would end up with a play that nobody would want to watch, right? Because, like, Britney Spears comes on the radio and the playwright, somebody tells the playwright, could you, like, just, like, write in the scene something that'll contextualize who this person is for us, right? And then, like, you just lose what the story you're trying to tell. So it's an impossible ask. It really is. It's an impossible ask. Like, just
I'd love to see that play where,
huh?
I'd love to see that play where that playwright is like, Britney Spears is an American pop star born in, you know, having to contextualize Britney Spears. It would be really funny.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have that type of stilted dialogue, right? You'd be like, oh my God, you're listening to Britney Spears. I can't believe she got a platinum record for whatever. Like, I don't know what you'd have to do, but that's certainly what people are asking me to do when it's like I'm writing about someone who said a word that maybe not everybody knows.
And it's okay to not know.
Yeah.
It's totally fine.
And I honestly feel like, not to put the responsibility on us necessarily, but in the work that I make, I am careful about, like, I would like to train audiences to be okay with not knowing what an Arab is saying, because they're actually cool with that for, like, French speakers and Russian right? Like, people go to the ballet, right? And to see opera and to see all of these things.
That's such a good point, right? Because yeah, you're right. Even an opera goer has seen work in Italian and German and French and whatnot, and seen those different cultural representations. They haven't necessarily seen anything having to do with our cultural heritages. They don't have that reference point.
Or they just have like the Italian composer from 1600s version of what happened in Egypt one time.
Or Aladdin.
Or Aladdin.
You know, which is going to be my segue into introducing this.
Aladdin is your segue.
Obviously, work. They have these artifacts, often orientalized, of huge region, culture, body of work that becomes distilled and simplified. And I obviously going to share something now, I think that blasts that open.
Into another dimension. Yeah, I would love to play that clip right now. And we'll also look at some stills from a show a few years ago.
Yes, Avi.
Yes.
Oh.
Avi, I want to know what was going on there, like narratively, and also like, could you relate it to the history of like Ataturk and the Ottoman Empire for me, please?
Well, the answer is yes. That was a piece that was part of this same festival that you saw a clip from Kareem at Target Margin, where it was a three-dimensional audio opera that I was dismantling and rebuilding specifically the Sinbad stories from the 1001 Nights, which, you know, I'd heard bits and pieces of and seen adaptations of growing up, good and bad and terrible and amazing, you know. So this was just like a chance for me to like think, it's like, all right, how do we tell stories, and can a story just be sound and music? And is that enough for you to conjure a visual on your own? And its relation to Ataturk is honestly obvious, and if you don't get it, I don't know what to say.
Were you thinking a lot? Because I remember that piece so palpably, and just comes back so vividly in those pictures and that sound. I mean, how much time did you spend thinking about the audience and their experience? And did you feel like the audience experience is different depending on sort of what lens they're bringing to it? Like, one of the things that came up in our pre-conversation is like, is the default of good what like white good is versus people POC good? You know, are there different standards of what an audience's expectation is? And were you thinking about that in the creation of this piece?
That's a really good question. You know, I was definitely thinking about an audience perception of this piece spatially, like where they were physically sitting, because that was The only requirement I received from Target Marching was that it had to have X amount of seats. So, and I didn't even really do that good a job of that. So I was thinking about that spatially, but also, you know, I was purposefully leaving it open in that there was no, to Mariam's point, like there was no narrative in a way. I even assumed that people had maybe read the text, but like it kind of didn't matter if they did or didn't, just because to me, there was a beginning and an end of sorts. And you could, in the arc, it felt like that was clear. So like the experience of that based on what people bring in was definitely totally open-ended. And I think by design, I love a good, clean show that tells you what happens, but also I love some weird mysteries, you know?
On this one, you were able to, I don't know if people could see in the photos, but there were speakers hanging at various places and staged around. So while nobody said move around the space, it became apparent that you could switch positions and hear it in a different way. And people were laying out on the floor, sitting on top of just having a sort of sound bath or more in-body experience of the piece, as opposed to like A to B, like what's happening now.
Which I think, you know, I don't want to say that that kind of experience is a MENASA experience, but I do think that there is like a way, like the beginning, in a Western fairy tales, the beginning of stories is once upon a time. I'm not sure what your experience is, but in Turkish folk tales, it begins once there was or once there wasn't. So there is this like prerogative to say, to like leave the onus of believing on the audience, right? Like maybe this didn't happen, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to tell you this story and I hope you like it. Like, so I think that is definitely something I wanted to bring into the piece. And I think maybe, I mean, do y'all have experiences with that kind of like ambiguity as part of the work that you create? Like purposeful ambiguity.
Yeah, it's sort of all I know how to do. To the point of someone saying like, okay, well now explain who Britney Spears is. It's like, I can't.
It's a great title for a show, by the way.
A person who needs no introduction. But that's that gap is what is so interesting and exciting, the space between knowing and not knowing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this will encourage people who are not us to like see someone who's MENASA and go and be like, oh, do you know my friend Palestine my friend Muhammad from Palestine or whatever. But I do think that this is part of the MENASA experience of being an art maker, because I just got a text from someone being like, yo, I'm so excited to see her on that panel and with my dear friend Mo, and my partner knows Kareem.
Amazing.
So I love that, the interconnectedness of our communities.
This panel comes out of, you know, a few years of shared experiences of all of us sort of finding each other and realizing like the world of MENASA theater makers encompasses such a broad variety of different storytellers, you know, and working in all these really exciting forms. And I think we've all become better from knowing one another. It's not like I talk to all of you all the time, but I do feel like you're a part of my community and my friends, so that if I'm wrestling with something as an artist and I know I'm pushing against the boundaries of what I know how to do, I could call up Avi easily and be like, you know, I don't know if I know how to do this. Like, could you help me? And I do think that we can all empower ourselves. And I've already seen that that is the most exciting thing about what's happening in MENASA theater generally right now, is that our community is more organized, engaged, talking to each other more than ever. And I think all of us are really rising up because of that. So I think it's really exciting. And that's why I thought it was be so great to bring a kind of a more specific lens to a conversation around non-traditional forms to Prelude. And, you know, we don't have a Q&A component as part of this, but we do want to encourage all of you watching, if you have questions for all of us, for any of us, for us individually, we're going to put up our email addresses at the end of this on a slide, and write our names down, our email addresses down, screen grab it or whatever, and write to us if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, if you want to just get into conversation. All of us, to a certain extent, can be found on social media or websites and stuff like that. But we're going to give you our direct email addresses, and we really would love to hear from everyone out there with whatever questions and thoughts you have about what you heard, what you're thinking about for the future. And hopefully we'll all be back in a room together, making art, seeing each other's art soon. Final words from everyone else?
Inshallah. Inshallah.
Oh, inshallah. Yeah. Man, that's a nice way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, sending love to all of you out there, and love to you guys. So nice to see you.
Yeah. Oh my God. This is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Kareem, thank you for actually just the inciting incident here.
Well, thanks to Prelude, thanks to David and Miranda and everybody else, everybody on the team that helped to put this together, all the people working behind the scenes at this moment.
Yes. Thank you all.
All right. Until the next time, my loves.
All right.
Good to see you all.
Bye.
Bye.
A huge thank you to Kareem, Mariam, Moe, and Avi. It has been such a pleasure hearing you share both your thoughts and your work. What a wonderful glimpse back at the theater that was before the pandemic, and also a wonderful look forward into the future towards a theater that I hope will be much more inclusive of these conversations. Thank you again. And thank you all who tuned in. As I mentioned at the beginning, this is one of the many free virtual events happening as part of the 2020 Prelude Festival. Today alone, we have 3 more things you can check out. At 7 p.m., we'll be airing a video entitled Una Niña, Una Familia, Un Pueblo. At 8 p.m., we'll be premiering a new piece by Kareem Lucas. And at 10 p.m. tonight and every night, except for the last night of the festival when it will be at 9 p.m., Man Cho will be hosting a meditation space called Hold. Happens for half an hour and has been a real light throughout the past 2 weeks. And again, that's every night at 10 p.m. except for the last night of the festival at 9, as well as every morning at 8:30. This and more information can all be found at preludenyc2020.com. Thanks again, everyone.